So this is Friday, the 13th of November 2020, and we are looking. This is part two. The part one was short, but it showed the main front pages of Fleet Street papers today. Now, this part B, we are looking at the Financial Times, which has got this headline. This headline, how close can it get to the camera? So the headline is saying Republican frustration starts to show as Trump faces calls to concede defeat. Now, this should not be news because there is no way that Trump has won the election and the election has been fiddled or rigged. And the fact that it is still dragging on shows that Trump is in intentional denial. It's not an accidental denial, but in an intentional denial. And the fact that in the paragraph 2, at the end of paragraph 1, in this piece, byline to Dimitri Sebastopoulos in Washington. It sounds like a kind of Greek name based in Washington. It says at the end of the first paragraph, with a growing number of Republicans using the term, within quotes, president-elect to refer to Joe Biden. I mean, that is remarkable, isn't it? That it should be in the news at all. President-elect, the guy is president-elect. And, the fact that this has to be pointed out is absolutely typical of the morass that is the American system. This should not be having to be discussed. And Philip Stevens on the Financial Times is talking about the special relationship with the US has run out of time. He's saying that the open secret about London's cherished special relationship with Washington is that it is a great deal more special for the British than the Americans. Winston Churchill embellished the relationship with all manner of flummery, including shared ideals and values, a common language, and unique bonds of kith and kin. US presidents have taken an unsentimental view, always measuring the bargain against the national interest. As far back as the 1960s, an advisor to John F. Kennedy's White House pointed up the asymmetry. Whatever the view in London, Richard Neustadt observed, Washington saw the UK as a middle power, neither equal nor vassal, which history, geography, or economics rendered especially significant to us for the time being. For London, the relationship was existential. In Washington, it was a nice to have. The imbalance has grown more pronounced over time. The UK still likes to present itself as a pocket superpower, equipping its military with the most advanced weaponry. One result is that its national security, nuclear weapons, the fighter planes that fly from an aircraft carrier, aerial surveillance of its coastal waters, is deeply embedded in the ties with Washington. Prime ministers make much of the supposed independence of the Trident nuclear deterrent. They rarely add that from the beginning, when Harold Macmillan negotiated with Kennedy to buy the Polaris missile system, Washington has insisted on a big say in its deployment. Independent it may be in name, but the UK depends on the US to make the system work. The outcome is a special relationship that is as much a source of neuralgia as in influence, even as they have signed up to the idea that the road to international influence runs through Washington. Successive prime ministers have fretted mightily lest the White House cool. Edward Heath, alone among post-war British leaders, was unfussed about securing a White House audience with the president. Instead of making an unseemly dash to Washington after his 1970 election, he waited for Richard Nixon to visit him at his country residence, Chequers. For Boris Johnson, these enduring anxieties have been sharpened by Americans' choice of Joe Biden as the next president. The prime minister was one of Donald Trump's chums, winning his backing for Brexit, even while then President Barack Obama's supported David Cameron's Remain campaign. Close aides to the president-elect talk about Mr. Johnson's populist politics as Trump light. Veterans of the Obama administration, now with Mr. Biden, have neither forgotten nor forgiven the prime minister's jibe that Mr. Obama's view of the UK was influenced by a part Kenyan ancestry. Mr. Johnson is right to be worried. Mr. Biden may not bear grudges, but he will be disinclined to give the prime minister the benefit of the doubt. Mr. Johnson intends his vision of global Britain to give the nation a swagger on the international stage. In truth, he badly needs a trade deal with the US. Mr. Biden has told him there is no such prospect if his demands for a Brexit deal with Brussels risk upsetting the peace process in Northern Ireland. So Brexit has further diminished the worth of the relationship to the US. For the 40-odd years of its membership, the UK was a supportive Atlanticist voice in the councils of Europe, amplifying Washington's liberal open market instincts. Post-Brexit, that role has been lost, and with it has gone a significant measure of US interest in the United Kingdom. The line to take for British officials is that the two nations' institutional ties, military and intelligence, as well as economic, will survive bumpy moments between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Biden. This is true as far as it goes. It avoids, though, the bigger picture of an ever more unbalanced relationship. Of course, as the chair of next year's round of climate talks and the G7 group of industrial nations, the UK can make itself useful to Washington. Yet the negotiations that will matter at the climate talks will be between the US and the EU, and then with China and India. The UK has become a bystander. As for trade, Mr. Johnson will have to wait his turn behind Brussels. The EU 27 provides a market for about 16% of US exports. The UK takes less than 5%. New Star's hard-headed assessment carried a warning. For the time being, Mr. Biden is not about to jettison a still useful ally because he dislikes Mr. Johnson. He can afford to pay less attention to London and turn to Berlin and Paris in resetting the transatlantic relationship. The cost for the UK promises to be one it finds hard to bear, a slow drift to irrelevance. Now, that is the piece by Philip Stevens. And that is a summary that has resonance with the evidence, let's say. And we shall be talking more about the evidence. And the fact that there is this line being admitted even by the Financial Times gives a clue, more than a clue, as to why suddenly, even on the front page of the Financial Times, Dominic Cummings, who dominated so much of Johnson's propaganda until a few days ago, is on its way out. And the fact that there has been a kind of role assigned or attributed to the girlfriend or fiancée of Boris Johnson in securing the departure of one Mr. Kane and being involved in the plot to have an end, bring an end to the all-male kind of rule at inside number 10 Downing Street. There is this letter in the Financial Times. The headline is, "The First War of Liberation from British Imperial Rule. We Irish do punch above our weight, but I think it is going a bit too far to claim we fought the First War of Liberation from British Imperial Rule, as claimed by Professor Emeritus Sean R. McCann of Trinity College, Dublin." Letters, November 7. "Especially now, our brothers across the pond can do with credit being given where it is due. Their independence was won 138 years before ours." That is the War of Independence by the Americans. War of Independence from the British. Now, this is interesting timing, this whole reference to British imperialism and the credit being given to the Americans for the first War of Independence from British imperialism, while Trump is still kind of fiddling. And the Financial Times main editorial is warning against the UK kind of sinking, getting submerged in protectionism. And this is again an anti-Brexit kind of analysis. It says on in paragraph 3, "In the case of the UK, the pandemic as well as Brexit present an opportunity to set out a new regime. An overhaul has been long overdue. The 2002 Enterprise Act, the centerpiece of UK competition law, has not been fit for purpose for some time. In recent years, ministers have all too often resorted to a case-by-case approach to takeovers, getting involved in everything from steel to cars. The result has been a lack of consistency, often marked by attempts to extract binding commitments on jobs or technology from foreign owners at the 11th hour and all the rest of it." The point is that there is, this was just a matter of time. And this also again shows why Corbyn was intellectually completely dumb. Corbyn should have foreseen the possibility that the USA system was such that the regime in White House could change. It wasn't very difficult to foresee if he had the intelligence to foresee. And the fact that there have never been any real kind of closure as to the allegations against she what is his name? Seamus Milne. Seamus Milne is the man that dominated Corbyn's kind of inner circle for most of the years that Corbyn was in post as leader of the Labour Party. And Seamus Milne has been quite incoherently and quite incongruously and quite contradictorily accused of being a spy of the Soviet Union, or the kind of soft to the communists ideas. And that has meant that Seamus Milne has been compromised and has been unable to shake that image off. And Corbyn, because he's lacking in intellect, has failed to grasp it and to dispose of it. And so therefore, Corbyn and Seamus Milne have been compromised by also the crooks inside the Labour Party that wanted the racist element of Brexit to be promoted, which Corbyn allowed to be promoted. And others acting as also provocateurs for the anti-Labour forces, posing as middle of the center or middle of the road, or kind of center right or soft right, like Lisa Nandi. Lisa Nandi has been an agent of the right-wing coup against the Labour Party leadership. All of these, plus the allegations that were fueled every day that the Labour Party leadership and the Labour Party, as fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, was an anti-Jewish kind of cabal. And Corbyn did not understand that the best way, the most effective way, the most honest and most truthful way to deal with that allegation would have been for him to put himself on the table up front as being totally, transparently, factually, evidentially, morally, ethically dedicated against racism of all kinds. But he didn't. And the fact that he did not excuse him or allow him to get away from the accusations. But had he done that, he would not have been sunk under that particular accusation or allegation. Anyone watching this must understand that this is coming as part of the world exclusive analysis by the Khoodeelaar campaign, based in East London, United Kingdom, providing the world exclusive analysis and insight into not only the Fleet Street bankruptcy and contradictions and, for example, the Financial Times confession that Brexit has been a bad thing and that Johnson has been exposed as being on the verge of being treated as irrelevant by events. Johnson, that is the regime and the kind of cabal that he represents, the cabal, the kind of interpretation, the image, the package of Britain on the world stage that Johnson kind of affiliates himself to. These are all things that we have said. We have said from the period like when they were doing the kind of campaign for the Brexit referendum, so-called, in 2016, we said that the biggest target of the racists was to undermine any international obligation, any international treaty, any international kind of agreement that the UK signed that exposed and weakened and undermined the racist basis of the English, that is England-based, judicial racism and bureaucracy and corruption. And by extension, The same about the UK government, UK kind of administration, and the UK Parliament. And what they have been saying repeatedly, including after yesterday, the Brexiteers, that is, that they want free movement to be brought to an end. Now, free movement is a euphemism, a kind of disguised kind of phrase to refer to black people, the immigrants, migrants coming from Africa and Asia. And as we've been saying, in the context of the anti-Muslim propaganda and narrative created 30 years ago with the launching of Saitan Rushdie, it is particularly anti-Muslim. And the anti-Muslim thing is not an invention by us. It is an invention confected by the liar Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is the one who lied about the Turks coming in, invading England, or invading Britain if the British didn't leave the European Union. Now, as we have said, on the facts, evidentially, there never has been any evidence, legally, contractually, economically, socially, culturally, whatsoever, that the EU, even without the UK, the rest of the EU members would accept any application by Turkey to join the EU. And the reason is that there persists a very serious, deep-seated anti-Muslim, anti-Turkish kind of attitude, mindset among the Western European countries which dominate the membership and the policies of the EU. So Turkey is not an applicant to join the EU and never has been. The previous kind of years had witnessed many communications between the EU and Turkey, whatever the political regime was in place in Turkey. And the communications have been about the economic relationship and the kind of migration from Turkey to Germany. And the German and Turkish relationship is very different from the relationship between Turkey and the UK. Historic reasons. And the fact that Angela Merkel made a historically stunning decision for a German head of state or head of government, allowing a very large number of Turkish people to enter Germany, or a very large number of Turkish people to become German and become normal or normalized in terms of citizenship and right to stay and so on, and the abolition of the immigration or migrant related or migration related kind of stigma to them, on them. When Angela Merkel did that, she solved for Germany a very serious problem. And the details are not necessarily relevant in this discussion because we have done the details many times, but essentially she diffused internally and internationally a very serious kind of political explosion. And it helped stabilize Germany to the extent that it has helped. It is not totally stable today in terms of migration from Turkey and the other parts of the world. But most of the explosive potential has been diffused by Angela Merkel. And in my view, Angela Merkel will live. This will be her biggest kind of achievement as the leader in the time that she was. Now, there was nothing that could be compared with that in terms of Britain, because there was no huge influx of any nationality, most certainly not Turkish, in Britain. And as the daily newspaper coverage shows, the numbers of migrants seeking asylum or settlement in the UK on average, let's say on average over the last 50 years, let's say, because various things have happened in the originating countries that have caused fluctuations in the numbers and in the kind of badge and the labels used by the asylum seekers or the potential migrants. And those fluctuating, differing levels and kind of grounds have been prompted by the increasingly hostile and racist and anti-Muslim, as I said, for the last 30 years, policies and rhetoric in Britain and other countries, including France. Compared to France and kind of Germany, the relationship between the kind of French state and the EU based on migration has been different from that of Germany in relation to migration. And the similarity, there are many similar kind of factors in the behavior of French governments and French media and the French political kind of establishment and their counterparts in Britain. They're similarly almost identically anti-Muslim and identically racist, anti-African and anti-Asian, and identically hostile to real integration of the people who have been born here but of African and Asian ancestry and descent. Now, these are very serious factors that need daily treatment and updating and examination towards a better, tolerant society. But these are not given any discussion or forum or platform in the Fleet Street papers. What I have read earlier about the piece, one piece in the Financial Times about the American administration, successive administration for the last, 60 years since Kennedy's time, treating the UK as an irrelevant or minor kind of thing for the time being, is a rare admission of the minor status that the UK as a whole has been given by the successive regimes in White House and in America. But this is not accepted. This is not acknowledged by the Daily Mail or the Daily Express or the Daily Borisgraph or the Times. But this is the fact. And the reason why they don't accept that is because if they accept that, then the entirety, all the mountains of lies that they peddle every day, and the brainwash people with brainwash the gullibles with, will collapse. I mean, the speed with which Dirty Murdoch abandoned Donald Trump when the results started coming in would never be anticipated, never be possible to be anticipated if anyone believed the years of lies by the Sun and the Times and the rest of Fleet Street about the kind of, they created the image of Donald Trump as somebody his actions did not support. The image they created was not supportable by objectively verifiable evidence. And even now, even in the days when they had to otherwise concede that Trump had been soundly beaten by Joe Biden, there were remnants of racists in the Fleet Street media, including the so-called soft-spoken racist and hate preacher Matthew Paris. They started to sing that Donald Trump's legacy is unforgettable and significant. There is no legacy that Trump is leaving that is significant and unforgettable except the legacy of evil, legacy of hatred, legacy of contamination of society and social morals, and the legacy of defying what is universally still accepted as due process and the rule of law and dignity and accountability in publicly elected post positions. So this is the Daily Star, which is continuing their comic kind of characterization of the COVID-19 and pandemic kind of politics on the front page. And they're doing a kind of quite plausible mocking, taunting and teasing and ridiculing this Johnson kind of cabal fronter and the eugenicist, the man who believes in herd immunity and the massacre of the majority and the defiance of the law that applies to the others. So they put this mask on him as a telling kind of kick at him that he has been mocking the majority, have been abiding by the dictation that people should wear masks. And he has not been wearing masks. And he has not been kind of observing the distance and the lockdown that others have been kind of penalized for not observing if they have been caught. So this is a rare kind of piece by a title in Fleet Street, even though it is only the Daily Star, and it says, "Skulk out of Downing Street with this over your head and nobody will know it's you, Dom. You are happy, we are happy, job's a good one." Now they're just having a kind of go at that one. And the Daily Mail is talking about the Christmas, the liberation of what they're saying, the British Christmas or the English Christmas. They're saying the male Christmas campaign, the clamor that cannot be ignored. MPs, charities, doctors, and families back male crusade to let relatives visit lonely loved ones in care homes. Now, this is a very emotional kind of thing. But the fact that they are now suddenly discovering the loved ones being kept in isolation and prevented from seeing their loved ones in the critical stage of their illness, this is not genuine, because the Daily Mail ignored the actual incidents that were happening at the height of the kind of pandemic a few months ago. So this is an emotional kind of hijacking of the emotionalism attached to the Christmas, and they're connecting the two, and they're making a case that they care about the people, and they're kind of claiming that all these people, charities, MPs, and others are backing them. The Daily Mail never has done anything like this for accountability by members of parliament. Not about Brexit, because Brexit was not about accountability. So we shall come to that in the second part of this statement. The Daily Mail never has done a campaign, let alone call it crusade, We shall talk about crusade later as well. The misuse of the crusade now and the inherent wrongness and racism of crusade in the first place when it was originally carried out centuries ago against the Muslims. The fact is that the Daily Mail is talking about the Christmas and the care homes and the restrictions on the visit by relations of seriously ill relatives in those care homes. They've never actually done a campaign about the councils that should be locally responsible for the safety of people in care homes, even if the care homes are not controlled or owned by the local councils. Legally, what is called the safeguarding of the elderly duties. There are in the English or British kind of statute book or the list of acts of parliament that actually are about the safeguarding of elderly people, either in care homes or in their own homes. Just like there are legislations concerning the safeguarding of the welfare of children, whether at the home, whether at the school, whether at any institution, or whether in the communities generally, in the boroughs or council areas concerned. And those children who are being kind of exposed to abuse and neglect, including to deaths which happen, those children are not being treated as warranting the urgent attention and the crusading campaigning by the Daily Mail. Because the risk that the Daily Mail faces if it carried out any such campaign would be to lose the support of most of the councils, because most of the councils in Britain are corruptly controlled. They're not accountable. And when there is the odd, that is exceptional, admission about a council doing wrongs, it is by accident. It's not intentional. Because the newspapers, all the newspapers in Fleet Street are sent information by victims. Victims of abuse by councils, neglect by councils, and indifference by council and prejudice by councils. Not every newspaper receives the same number of information or complaints, but they do receive large numbers of complaints and information about councils doing wrong. Now, if the newspapers receiving such information did the proper journalistic job, which is to follow up leads or clues or tips, if they followed up, that they didn't have to necessarily accept every single statement made by the people who send them the information. It is not for the people who send the information to do that. It is to make that information available to the journalists or journalist kind of journals, the Fleet Street papers, or their equivalents in the so-called provinces, in the smaller towns and areas. Then it is up to the journalists and the editors, so-called, to follow up the tips, follow up the information, follow up the leads. But they don't. And it is something that we have first-hand and recurring experience of. In the case of the East London area, covered by, let's say, the Archant, A-R-C-H-A-N-T, Archant -owned or controlled print titles called the Newham Recorder in Newham and Docklands and Tower Hamlets Advertiser, or the similar ones in the other East London or Northeast London areas where the Archant company still controls the local titles, most of them. They don't publish anything critical about any of the local councils. They don't. And the reason why they don't publish is not because there is not enough information for these titles to run stories that would be like, out of 365 days, they would have to run 350 days at least pieces that would be all about the failures and the negligence and the corruption and the criminality being done by these councils and their employees. If that were to be the case, these papers would not have any support from any of the councils, would they? So when they are saying, on the one line thing they're now saying, the Newham Recorder, the East London Idiotizer, that these titles, so-called, they're sinking in terms of the circulation of the membership, but still they are in circulation, let's say. So whatever the number of people kind of following them, they are still afloat. And that's trying to kind of raise funds for these titles. It's part of the commercial policy of the crooks at Archan to control them. And let's say words to the effect that if you value what we have been doing, and if the information you have read or whatever is of use to you, then contribute something to us. They say that we have been, for a long time, or various lengths of time, they say, serving your community, our community, with news and journalism. If you value that, give us some money. Now that's fine as a general statement. But what have they been doing in the journalism? The journalism about the things that matter make a difference between right and wrong for the victims of the corrupt councils and the criminally behaving councils and the negligent council and the prejudiced council and the crooked council. What about that? There is no evidence because online, the Archant actually blocks critical comments. And especially it blocks critical comments coming from identifiable sources of criticism. Because they know that once the identifiable sources of criticism of the local council is given space and is allowed online or allowed on the paper, which is even less frequently allowed, then the case would be stronger against the council. And that will show that the paper is playing a role against the council. And they don't want to do that. So extrapolate that into the role of the centrally kind of published UK nationals, which is how the BBC kind of calls Fleet Street's corrupt titles. For a start, they're not nationals because there are so many kind of elements that contradict the assertion of national, because they don't actually represent Scotland or the people of Scotland or the kind of claims of Scotland or of the people of Cornwall. They don't even exist. Cornwall isn't even acknowledged as existing by the Fleet Street papers that are edited by liars, written by liars and deniers. And Wales is absolutely marginalized. And Northern Ireland is treated with contempt. Whatever the kind of internal kind of differences among the people in Northern Ireland, so-called, essentially there is this acceptance based on common kind of factors that London, England, treats the Northern Ireland people with contempt, suspicion, disrespect, negligence, and so on. So the Daily Mail is making a pretense of Haque kind of claim about the fact that it concerned about the loved ones being in care homes, being allowed to be visited by their loved ones. Now, here in the Daily Mail with the Australian woman, Amanda Platel, who is one of the most racist women in journalism ever. I mean, she's She is absolutely toxic, Amanda Platel. And there is a kind of rivalry between her toxicity and the toxicity emitted by the wife of Michael Gove, who is Sarah Bain, whom correctly many call Sarah Bain. Now, this is the piece that she has written, or has been put with her byline, if you like, by the Daily Mail, calling Boris Johnson fiancée or current girlfriend as the woman feared. Now, why have they suddenly invented her? It is absolute lie. It's not her power at all. It's Johnson needs her to appear in order to save him from being sunk and submerged in the depth of stupidity that he actually dug for himself by lying about Brexit. So he has prodded her up front forward, and suddenly, within 24 hours, she is the woman feared in number 10 Downing Street. That's a complete lie. And there is an ongoing piece about prosecution of this nurse, who is a white woman, young white woman, who has murdered 8 children, 8 babies. That is so atrocious that we cannot even bear to go into the details, which we shall not. And the Daily Mail on 2 pages, 6 and 7, running a double spread about doctors saying that family visits can save lives. Now, how dare they? I mean, when did they discover that? When they imposed a ban on members of the family visiting their relations, what evidence did they have for that? That was going to do damage. Because the patients, all of the elderly patients in care homes, as it is, already starved of emotional support. And to stop them and prevent them from seeing their relations, their family members, would exacerbate the illness and their feeling unwell and isolated, neglected, confused. So when did they kind of decide that that was a good thing in any way for them? Unless, of course, it was Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson's agenda to allow as many of the elderly to die as they could manage to get away with allowing. That was the herd immunity. So the elderly people are sacrificed with the collusion of the papers, the Daily Mail and others, while they should have been saved. And the Daily Mail should have done the normal journalistic job at that time, because the Daily Mail knew what was happening. And it says about a story about a couple. They're saying in the kind of section they're running as "Let Them Hold Hands." And the headline is "Reunion to Move You to Tears." And Betty was barred from seeing husband Kenneth in his care home. The only solution? To move in herself. Their story, like all those here, will make you weep with anger. Weep with anger. Now, this is not something that should have been necessary. The Daily Mail has a policy, like the rest of Fleet Street, of treating ordinary people with ordinary kind of facts and evidence and information as not existing. Let's say this, there is no such magic about journalism or reporting or journalists. If the journalism and the journalist behavior primarily is based on fantasy and fiction and denial, journalism essentially only valid if it carries the truth, it reports the truth. And for 200 years, Fleet Street has been treating ordinary people as not existing. The reason why we keep saying that this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street is entirely to do with that. Nobody, no organization, academic or journalistic or professional or political, parliamentary, whatever, is doing this diagnosis. And we are doing this as the original contribution on a platform to expose the lies of the media, mainstream media, item by item, chapter and verse, word by word, topic by topic. Now, here is another admission by the Daily Mail, which should have been running this every week, this kind of story. But it doesn't. And it's only running this story to put pressure on behalf of the campaign against lockdown. That's a battle, that's an internal battle among the conservatives and the right-wingers. It says that how long did the 140,000 wait for more than a year for NHS treatment? What does it show? It shows for 140,000, according to that particular tally. The number may be widely different. 140,000 people are being denied health care at the point of need. So it shows that the NHS for them is not functioning, is dead, is scrapped, is abolished. Now, to take on the Donald Trump answer, these people could easily buy their health care, private care. And they would have to be spending billions of pounds to get the equivalent of the health care they need. And they haven't got the money. So they don't have the health care to provide which the NHS is supposedly in existence. And so therefore, this kind of evidence and evidence-based reporting should be the norm, but it is not. And the fact that it is not is the sickness of the Daily Mail and the rest of Fleet Street that behaves in the same way, suppressing the truth about the NHS dysfunctioning or the NHS being kept from delivering the health care at the point of need that the NHS was built to deliver. And Amanda Patel piece on page 15 says, a woman feared. She led the coup against key aide. Now Kerry is more influential than ever. But ex-Tory press chief Amanda Patel asks, should a PM's consort really wield so much power? Well, my answer to that is that it is not Kerry wielding any power at all. Is Kerry being used as a kind of topically, trendily female name and soft kind of thing to rescue Boris Johnson instead of Boris Johnson being exposed as admitting that he has failed and he has been exposed as a liar? Kerry is actually doing two things. One is to stop the Brexit nightmare, and the other thing is that due to the results in the USA, save Boris Johnson from being lumbered with these people that have been at the forefront of the Brexit kind of lunacy and have been responsible for the lies for Brexit retailed by a Trump. Because the UK's role in the economic context, if you like, is that if the USA market is lost or the economic relationship with the USA is lost, then it will be a significant loss. Not only that, the global Britain role that the liars like Boris Johnson boasted about after Brexit was, quote, done, that would not be anywhere near existence. It would be evaporate. So it's rescuing Boris Johnson by using this Kerry Simons. She is not dominating anything. She is being peddled as dominating something. And Amanda Patel is wrong. The Daily Mail is wrong to say that she is feared. She is not doing that. Any kind of thing. It's Johnson who is using her. But anyway, this spin by Amanda Patel says, some years ago, when I was head of communications for William Hague, then Tory leader of the opposition, he called me and other key advisors to a crisis meeting at his Yorkshire home. There were 12 of us at the dining table, including William's wife, Fionn, a highly intelligent civil servant. But when Fionn offered her views on the crisis, William told her in no uncertain terms that as interesting as her intervention was, it had no place at that meeting. Sexist? No, just a recognition of a British tradition. When we elect a party leader, we do not also ordain the wife, husband, or girlfriend to proffer their wisdom on how to run the country. Fast forward to today and to our current Prime Minister's consort, Kerry Simons, 32. This week, the glamorous Simons appears to have intervened in a remarkable way to orchestrate a plot to boot out Boris Johnson's Director of Communications, Lee Kane, to prevent his promotion to Chief of Staff. This wasn't some minor personal issue. It cut to the heart of who is really in charge of the government's messaging in the midst of a pandemic. And even some say who is in charge of the government itself. Now, by many accounts, Kane divided opinion. A former Red top journalist is described as a wheeler dealer who, along with his mentor, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, could at times cast a malign influence over number 10, even presuming at times to dictate to the boss. But even if Kerry was on the right side of the argument over Kane, she shouldn't have been having the argument to start with. Put simply, this was a power grab led by Kerry with the help of three formidable female accomplices. The first is former Guardian journalist Allegra Stratton, newly appointed to head Boris's US-style daily press briefings due in January. It's reported that Stratton wouldn't work with Kane and wanted to report directly to the Prime Minister. Second, Home Secretary Priti Patel, who has long been suspicious of Kane's close bond with the Machiavellian Cummings. No one, apart from Boris, has much time for Cummings, of course, since he infamously broke the first lockdown to drive 264 miles to visit family and go sightseeing at Barnard Castle, including driving to test his eyesight. Finally, the hitherto little known but highly respected Munira Mirza, head of the Downing Street Policy Unit, who also apparently had her misgivings about Kane. This group of women taking back control, call it girl power, call it what you really, really want, but don't call it democracy. For make no mistake, Boris's determined fiancé is the lead suspect in this main coup at the heart of government. And in light of this, we are entitled to ask, who is Carrie Simons really? What right does she have to determine the direction of policy behind the black door of number 10? And how, despite being unelected, has she become the most powerful woman in politics today, and possibly the most influential prime ministerial companion in history? Officially, Kerry has a job as a senior advisor at Oceania, a not-for-profit organization that protects the oceans. Oceana extols her qualification as a graduate of the University of Warwick, where she received first-class honors, and her passion for protecting the oceans and marine life. The honors is spelled in an American way, Honors, to which Amanda Platel puts the SIC in brackets after that. So this is the kind of take by the Daily Mail's Amanda Platel, but it is not true, because it is Boris Johnson who has initiated the whole thing. And there is a piece, 2-page spread on the Daily Mail about the follow-up to their coverage of Martin Bashir and his lies to Diana's brother Charles Spencer. It says that Bashir said to quit BBC. Row over Panorama interview is tragic way to retire, he admits to colleagues. And this is not the whole truth, but that is the headline the Daily Mail is running in the piece about Martin Bashir. And we shall be continuing our narrative about and our commentary on our examination of the lies perpetrated by the BBC every day, and the BBC's culture of lying and racism and denial and confection and obstructions and suppression of the truth. And there is a kind of Daily Mail gossip expressing ooze and sorrow for Brenda's son Charles. And it says, Prince Charles's great uncle Lord Mountbatten is accused of leaving a legacy of bloodshed and bitterness as Viceroy of India. In a Channel 5 documentary transmitted tomorrow, that is Saturday, the 14th of November 2020, blaming his disastrous seamanship for the loss of 150 crew on HMS Kelly and quoting FBI files claiming that he, Mountbatten, was a homosexual. With the Crown about to portray the trauma of Charles's marriage to Diana, hasn't Charles suffered enough? We agree this is a completely fabricated kind of excuse to promote Charles as the victim. On Donald Trump's election, the Queen sent him an unprecedented message of congratulation. The text didn't appear on the Buckingham House website and remains secret. Will Boris Johnson urge her to send a similar herogram to Joe Biden? This is the kind of stupidity that the Daily Mail thinks is so important politically and socially. And here is a small one in that column about Andrew Neil actually telling this Lee Cain, who has just been the subject of the Downing Street power struggle, etc. Andrew Neil sheds no tears at the departure of Downing Street's Director of Communications, Lee Cain. Neil tweeted, "Can't recall ever meeting you, but you were the one who kept stringing us along during the 2019 campaign, saying Boris Johnson really wanted to do a BBC interview with me." Me meaning Andrew Neil. And Neil goes on, "It was just a matter of logistics. Bullshit, wasn't it?" says Andrew Neil. "But I guess doing your master's bidding." Now that's where it is. The fact that the Daily Mail and others are claiming that it's Carrie Simons who is the most feared woman now. It was Boris Johnson who was telling Lee Cain to lie to the BBC about Johnson, promising to appear to be interviewed by Andrew Neil. Now let's say that Andrew Neil is not an angel. Andrew Neil is a supporter of Boris Johnson, supporter of Brexit, supporter of everything else to do with the lying to the public and lying in politics. And Andrew Neil is business commercially deeply involved with the Spectator, America Press, Spectator, Britain, and all the other kind of business outlets with which Boris is politically connected and which support Boris Johnson's right-wing kind of politics and the opportunism and cover up his lies and cover up for him. So Boris Johnson telling Lee Cain to lie to the BBC about Boris Johnson promise to be interviewed by Andrew Neil, must have been known to Andrew Neil himself. So why didn't Andrew Neil say this very thing, the bullshit, at the time? Because Andrew Neil didn't want to sink Boris Johnson's ship, although it was not possible to sink any deeper than Jeremy Corbyn had sunk the Labour Party's cause. But it could damage Boris Johnson slightly, maybe. And the rest of the lies that Boris Johnson has been telling, Andrew Neil has not listed or catalogued them in the last 30 years. The only BBC-linked name that has done anything remotely similar to what should have been done was Eddie Mayer, who did one edition of the Andrew Marr show on BBC One on a Sunday. And he interviewed Boris Johnson before Boris Johnson became a kind of minister or kind of leader of the party. Of course, it was well before that. Although it was well before that, that interview and that particular conversation with Eddie Mayer and Boris Johnson will remain one of the most unforgettable kind of moments. It should have been. It should have been one of the many such moments, but it is only one of its kind. And in that one, Eddie Mayer called Boris Johnson, "You are a nasty piece of work." And it wasn't a joke. It was true. It was the truth that... Let's see what he was saying, exactly when he said that. So that was some years ago. It was 3 years before the Brexit even. It was, according to The Guardian, it was in March 2013. And it said, London Mayor admitted he had sandpapered a quote in a Times story and failed to deny he had lied to his party leader. Now that is, 2013 was still, Boris Johnson was in post at the expense of London as the Mayor of London. And this piece by Patrick Winter, political editor, was online on Sunday, the 24th of March 2013, 18:23 GMT. And it reads, "It must have seemed a good idea at the time. A 15-minute light grilling on the morning BBC sofa with whichever stand-in presenter the corporation had dashed up to fill the void left by Andrew Marr, still recovering from a stroke. Nothing that an old hand like Boris Johnson need fear. Tussle the hair a little, some self-deprecation, and a bit of a plug for the BBC TV documentary on Monday to remind the Tory backbenchers that if the ball ever popped out of the scrum, he would be on hand to take it almost accidentally over the line. A spot of liberal differentiation from his school chum David Cameron on the benefits of migrants might provide with him on entry to the likely story of the day. The Prime Minister's imminent speech on migrants and access to social housing. But after the 15 minutes of chilling inquisition by the softly spoken Eddie Mayer, Johnson's reputation had taken a severe pounding. Indeed, it was probably the worst interview the Mayor has ever conducted. Now, he's not Mayor now, but in 2013, he was Mayor. Also, in that post, he had the sexual relationship with the American Jennifer Arcuri, which he denied until very recently, when Arcuri was reported to have admitted to having had a sexual relationship with Johnson as recalled in the book by this person, Tom Bauer. All the newspapers, including the Daily Mail, knew that that was the case, but they suppressed that truth. After the opening exchanges, this Patrick Winter is talking about the interview on BBC Andrew Marr show, interview by Eddie Mayer of Boris Johnson. After the opening exchanges, good morning, how are you? Very, very good, thank you. Johnson went downhill at an alarming pace until by the interview's close, admitting he had sandpapered quotes as a Times journalist, failing to deny he lied to the party leader at the time, Michael Howard, about an extramarital affair and conceding that he, Johnson, had humored an old friend when he asked for a phone number in the knowledge that the friend intended to beat up the owner of it. Now, the word humored that has been used by Patrick Winter is evidence of Patrick Winter's own dishonesty, which we shall elaborate on at a later time or in due course. By the interview's close, "You are a nasty piece of work, aren't you?" was one of Mayer's more generous reflections on Johnson's integrity. Doubtless, Johnson had been lulled into a false sense of security by the opening minutes, in which he was able to hint without providing incontrovertible proof that he thought Cameron was misunderstanding the importance of migrants to the London economy. So that shows that Johnson can be a liar on a huge scale. He didn't think that in the years to the referendum for Brexit, he said the opposite during the Brexit thing. In fact, he capitalized on the fear of migrants in order to get the Brexit referendum quote done. He, that is Johnson, also gently put the boot into his predecessor, that is Ken Livingstone, as mayor for failing to plan the London Olympics stadium properly. He came across as the charming, talented politician that he is. But then Mayer took the interview to an unexpected turn and asked Johnson why he had agreed to be interviewed for the Michael Cockerell documentary. Johnson flannelled before, saying he had not seen the program. Suddenly, Mayer's tone changed lethally. "But this happened in your life, so you know about this. The Times let you go after you made up a quote. Why did you make up a quote?" It's impossible to describe the menacing politeness of tone in which Mayer specializes, or his ability to pause mid-sentence to maximize the impact. Johnson asked plaintively, "Are you sure your viewers wouldn't want to hear more about housing in London?" It was, he added, a long and lamentable story, to which Mayer replied, "Okay, but you made up a quote." "You made a quote up." Johnson was cornered. "Well, what happened was that I ascribed events that were supposed to have taken place before the death of Piers Gaveston to events that actually took place after the death of Piers Gaveston," he added. "Yes, you made something up," Mayer replied. Johnson said, "Well, I mean, I mildly sandpapered something somebody said. And yes, it's very embarrassing, and I'm very sorry about it." With this admission trousered, Mayer continued, "Let me ask you about a barefaced lie. When you were in Michael Howard's team, you denied to him you were having an affair. It turned out you were, and he sacked you for that. Why did you lie to your party leader?" Johnson squirmed. "Well, I mean, again, I am with great respect. On that, I never had any conversation with Michael Howard about that matter, and I don't propose." Mayer interrupted, "You did lie to him." Johnson, "Well, I don't propose to go into all that again." Mayer, "I don't blame you." Johnson, "No, well, why should I? I have been through, that question a lot with the, well, watch the documentary. Why don't we talk about something else? Unfortunately for Johnson, Mayer was willing to change the subject. Referring to the documentary, Mayer explained, the program includes your reaction as you listen to a phone call which your friend Darius Guppy asks you to supply the address of a journalist so that he can have him physically assaulted. The words beaten up and broken ribs are said to you. Johnson replied after snorting about an old story being dragged up. Yes, it was certainly true that he was in a bit of a state, and I did humor him in a long phone conversation from which absolutely nothing eventuated. And there you go. But I think if any of us had our phone conversations bugged, they might, people say all sorts of fantastical things whilst they are talking to their friends. Mayer proceeded to inform in passing a dazed Johnson that even convicted fraudster Conrad Black does not quite trust him, before asking him to show some honesty by openly admitting that his ambition is to be prime minister rather than trading in obscurity metaphors, obfuscatory metaphors such as rugby balls emerging from a truck or saying it is not going to happen. Mayor, you are not going to land on the moon either. But do you want to be prime minister? Say it. Johnson obfuscated, presumably hoping for something to eventuate, before saying he wanted to do all he could to help Cameron be re-elected. And in those circumstances, it is completely nonsensical for me to indulge, this increasingly hysterical, Mayor, you could end it all just by saying that you know to be true. What should viewers make of your inability to give a straight answer to a straight question? By now, most viewers are hiding behind their sofa or telling their gawking children to look away or ringing the BBC begging them to show the test card. While the clock running down, with the clock running down, Johnson desperately tries to mount a recovery, saying he disputes Mayer's interpretations. Then he resorts to the old standby. What viewers want to know is, he said, they don't care about phone conversations with my friends 20 years ago. They don't care about some ludicrous so-called made-up quote. And that's the third accusation. I can't remember. Lying to Michael Howard, Mayer reminds him. Before Johnson finally collapses in a heap, his lights, pannier bag, and reputation strewn across the bicycle lane. Now that's Patrick Winter in The Guardian, 24th of March, I think, 2013. And that's Sunday, the 24th of March. So Boris Johnson was called a nasty piece of work, and he was lying even when asked repeatedly by Eddie Mayer to confess that he wanted to be prime minister. And all of these years later, he is prime minister now, and he's sunk. He cannot manage sacking Dominic Cummings straight by himself. He has to use Kerry Simons, and the Daily Mail is wrong about Kerry Simons being the most feared woman. She's not doing it. It's Johnson who is doing it. Now the Daily Mail has got a piece about the HS2. 2 pages spread, 24 and 25 pages. Thought it was still being argued over? Think again. As remarkable pictures show, controversial 106 billion pound rail link has already broken cover. And there is a piece about the House of Commons barring MPs suffering from cancer from taking part in a debate on cancer. So what is the Boris graph saying? The Boris graph is giving the full page treatment to the goings. We recall here the speech that Sajid Javid delivered after he was shunted out by Boris Johnson, because Javid had just ended his career as the UK finance minister after Boris Johnson appointed Sunak to the post. And in a speech which was noted almost for its kind of humorous content, however small the amount of the humor there was, the speech that Sajid Javid made contained a phrase that was absolutely intentionally included. Whoever had scripted that, whether he did the scripting or somebody else did the scripting, it had a very telling kind of two words in it. And he said, in reference to the events and the politics and the internal kind of power struggle that went on in the kind of Downing Street, generally Downing Street kind of center of political power inside the inner circles. Sajid Javid said the comings and goings. The comings was interpreted swiftly as a reference to Dominic Cummings with a C-W-U-M-M-I-N-G-S rather than C-O-M-I-N-G-S. So comings and goings. Now that was the Cummings taking over that Sajid Javid referred to, or his speech contextually, topically at the time was seen as referring to. Now it's the goings of the comings. And the Boris Johnson graph picture shows that the comings is now doing the goings. Now whether they kind of relate this same goings to any role played by Carrie Simmons has to be seen, but let's see what they're saying to beginning. It says beginning of the end in number 10 for Cummings. Prime Minister supporters urge him to take back control after Downing Street battle. Supporters urge him to take back control. That is, supporters of Boris Johnson asking Boris Johnson to take back control. And they're saying that Cummings was back in number 10 Downing Street yesterday after allegedly threatening to walk out if Lee Kane was allowed to resign. This is the beginning of the end for Dom. Lee has been covering Dom's flank and he will soon be gone. And what is the Matt cartoonish saying? It is saying the number 10 power battle. Is this the second wave or the third wave of Dominic Cummings? That is again having a correct kind of commentary on Dominic Cummings' role in number 10 Downing Street in the power struggle. Now, the statistics as published in the Boris graph about the COVID, state of COVID in the UK is daily virus cases 33,470. It's an increase of 6% change in the 7 days average. And there are additional 595 deaths. And the total is 50,365 deaths caused by COVID, the virus. And So there is a huge kind of spread on the Boris graph on pages 4 and 5, dedicated to the alleged power being wielded by Allegra Stratton, who is given the prime kind of photo there. And the others are this a huge 2-page spread on a paper of this size. And what we have been saying in this commentary? We have been saying that the papers are not telling the truth about the state of the virus or how it affects people or what the state of the actual scientific evidence is. That is what we have been saying for months. There is an admission, there is a vindication of what we have been saying here. And we have been saying that the papers are not telling the truth, not doing the proper journalism. But this admission printed in the Boris graph is the nearest that can come to vindicating what we have been saying. And we have been saying that as part of the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, this is what he's saying. This is the former chief medical officer. And she said, according to this piece by Bill Gardner, Britain has been found wanting. The public deserves to know everything, which is exactly what we have been saying. So this is the only person, quote, in authority in government that has actually admitted this, and this is something that should have been obvious to the papers and including the Boris graph, but they have not been telling the truth. When Dame Sally Davis stepped down as chief medical officer last September, she felt she had done a pretty good job. As Downing Street's most senior medical advisor for nearly a decade, she had worked hard to protect the nation's health, tackling sugary foods, problem drinking, and the creeping menace of antimicrobial resistance. Yet only 5 months after Dame Sally handed over the reins to Professor Chris Whitty, her tenure arguably failed its greatest test. At some point next year, the 70-year-old is certain to be brought back to Westminster to face a public inquiry, whether she and other former Whitehall mandarins will be asked 3 inevitable questions. Why were the people of this country, one of the world's richest, left so defenseless against a disease like COVID-19? Why were countries like South Korea and Taiwan so much better prepared? And who was responsible? Now, these are questions we have been asking. We have been asking at far greater length and depth than this piece in the Daily Boris graph does or will ever do or will be done by any subsequent pieces by any of the Fleet Street papers. Because essentially they're doing this from a safe angle because she is not in power, so they can say more things about her failures than they would have done during her tenure, and they didn't do while she was in place. And there is a piece in the Boris graph saying the third of fresh food contains a harmful cocktail of pesticides. Now, this is connected with the fact that the NHS, founded 70 years ago to provide healthcare at the point of need, has been neglected. And so the answer to the first question that she is going to be asked is that all the governments and all the people in power or in decision-making positions failed to prepare the NHS to make it fit to deliver the healthcare at the point of need. So here is this admission that a third of the fresh food contains harmful pesticides. What does it mean? It means all the food kind of health check on the food, safety of the food has been mainly failure, has been completely off target. So there has been no accountability, there is no kind of audit, and there is no kind of holding anyone to account. Who is responsible? That's the third question they say that the Sally Davis is going to face from the parliamentary inquiry. And nobody has been held responsible. And our campaign that has been asking questions about the 18,000 or so treaties that the UK has been a member of for decades. We have been asking questions as to where the treaties, rather the requirements on the signatory state, requirements to comply with the treaty obligations. That requirement, where is that requirement monitored? We've been asking this question because the newspapers don't mention the existence of treaties as a rule, because they are, the Fleet Street papers are Little England newspapers, just like the judicial bureaucracy is Little English judicial bureaucracy, just like the parliament. Even before Cameron corruptly denied the Scottish MPs any say on election, on matters, votes in parliament on matters to do with England only. Parliament has been English, Little English and English centric, England centric. Despite the fact that for decades the UK was a member of the European Economic Community and later of the European Union, and despite the fact that thousands of treaties exist on the database of which UK has been a member, there is no recognition of any of the obligations in the behavior, in the thinking, in the references, in the frames of references that are accessible and that are on the main tables, in the behavior, in the programs of the legislative program of the UK Parliament, on the news schedules of the mainstream newspapers, the BBC, Sky, ITV, Channel 4, whatsoever. And therefore, there is no recognition of these treaties, although officially or formally on the record, the UK remains an actively signed up members to literally thousands of agreements, declarations, charters, conventions. So this week we updated our queries and we communicated to the House of Commons Inquiry Office our campaign. And they had no clue. They said that they were about the work of Parliament and what goes on in Parliament, but they were not part of the government. It was the government which would have the answers. And they gave us a kind of email contract, which we contracted. And the answer to that email contract question that we sent to the email address, the answer only confirmed the fact that they had no clue and they didn't have any care about the kind of treaties and the obligations. So it's a complete charade and it's a complete open lying kind of role by the UK on every single international treaty obligation. So the differences that these treaties are supposed to have been making to the UK behavior, that is the behavior of the parliament, behavior of the judiciary, behavior of the courts, behavior of the government, have been completely not applied. And it doesn't make any difference whether the government has been of the conservative kind of orientation and color or of the labor orientation or color. So there has been no argument, there has been no kind of pressure, there has been most certainly no campaign by any of the establishment to make these treaties relevant to the UK's kind of conduct, and the UK being required to explain what it was doing in relation to each of the requirements that it was obliged to apply. Now that absence of application applies to the UK central government as well as the UK regional government, as well as the central government departments, as well as the behavior, attitude and utterances of the UK Prime Minister, Foreign Minister and UK ministers generally. And the same thing applies to the local councils, regardless of what particular party or so-called partisan orientation these councils are controlled by. In other words, the fact that the UK is one of the most kind of racist and hostile member countries of the United Nations, obstructing the implementation of the United Nations supported Convention for Migrants' Rights. It shows that the United Nations, although it has been observing or marking, or some say celebrating the 75 years since its foundation, most of its charters, founding aims, agreements, requirements have been ignored by the signatory states if UK's behavior is to be accepted. And when the requirements are supposed to require the member states and member states parliament to only pass legislation after meeting the requirements for transparency, for fairness, for rigor and democracy and accountability and universality. Although that is the requirement, that is the requirement across the board, that the UK as a member state or the signatory state can only pass legislation as per the obligations arising from that agreement and their signature. That the legislation concerned or the bill concerned meets the requirements contained in the instrument that the UK signed. Now, repeat over thousands of times, according to the number of treaties and charters and declarations and conventions, you can see that the UK has been breaching every day thousands of requirements and obligations, international obligations. And it's not at the expense of some other people outside of the UK. It's to the cost of UK people, to the health of the UK people, the well-being of the UK people, the rights of the UK people. Most of them white people, indigenous people. People that the UK government, the UK agencies, the UK institutions, the UK university, the UK media, broadcast and print and radio, they all treat as gullibles, as belonging to the third or a fourth tier. They don't matter. And that's the depth and the seriousness of the crisis in this country. If there is health crisis, if there is crisis in parliament, this is the reason. And the press, the media, why we have to do the world exclusive diagnosis of the media, this is why. Because the media is complicit. The British media, the Fleet Street Press, the BBC, the Sky News, they are all complicit in the intentional denial and breaking of international obligations that are owed to British people by the British government and British Parliament and British judiciary. At every stage of these institutions, there is crisis, there is obstruction, there is denial, there is lack of accountability. So we shall be continuing.